Welcome back. It is my pleasure to have in studio with us Arif Virani, Member of Parliament for Parkdale High Park and Parliamentary Secretary for Multiculturalism, to assist the Minister of Heritage. Let's hear his thoughts on the Canadian government's response to the Quebec shooting and anti-Muslim policies south of the border. Arif, thank you for taking the time and welcome to our show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I want to ask you, what were your initial reactions when you heard about the Quebec mosque shooting in light of, all of the Islamophobic rise in xenophobia that we're seeing not only in the US but here at home as well, unfortunately?
So I'm a Muslim Canadian. My reaction was shock, it was horror, it was sadness, it was a feeling of loss and despair. But in the days that have ensued, it has come around to a feeling of hope, a feeling of solidarity, and a feeling of a sense of inclusion and belonging, particularly with the sentiments expressed by my parliamentary colleagues, by Canadians in general who are not of the Muslim faith, who have embraced the religion, the loss of life, and the protection of religious tolerance in our country.
So how do you respond? We have seen a lot of solidarity, a lot of other faith groups come together, but we're seeing, a rise in Islamophobia. So one example is that when the funeral was happening of some of the members of the community that passed away, there was another mosque that was actually vandalized. So how do we deal as a Canadian government and as a Canadian community with this anti-Islamic Muslim sentiment? There's racism, there's hatred.
I think it's multifaceted. The events that occurred on the date of the Montreal funerals, where another mosque was vandalized, as you point out, are troubling. But we can't fool ourselves to think that these things don't exist and won't continue to exist. What we need to do is we need to identify them, call them out, not put information like that sort of under the carpet, so to speak. But we also need to redouble our efforts to not be complacent, right? And you hear parliamentarians or other leaders talk about this all of the time. You have to be vigilant in the defense of various initiatives, whether it's poverty reduction, homelessness, etc. But when you're talking about emphasizing Canadian diversity and Canadian values of tolerance and pluralism, you can never be complacent. I took a lot of comfort from the statement in the House that was made by Joel Lightbound, who is the Member of Parliament for the particular community where the mosque was located in Quebec City. And he discussed what had transpired, but he also talked about having not felt like he or Canada had done enough to stop the spread of this kind of attitude and this kind of hatred. And if you don't stop it, you can see what happens when it bubbles over. And I think that's really the task and the challenge for all of us, whether you're a Muslim Canadian Member of Parliament or a non-Muslim Canadian Member of Parliament. I think these are values that define us, but we have to keep being vigilant to protect them lest they get eroded.
Now, how can we be more vocal? And I ask this question also of the Canadian government because, Prime Minister Trudeau obviously made very positive remarks in light. I want to take the conversation a bit further to Trump's Muslim ban. And Prime Minister Trudeau actually tweeted when that happened that, we are a country that diversity is our strength and we welcome those who are fleeing persecution, etc. But a lot of people are saying that, that's indirectly referencing some of Trump's policies. Shouldn't the Canadian government be more explicit? And how do you respond to that?
So my first response is that the Prime Minister has been, to everything that I've seen and to my observation, outstanding in terms of his leadership on this issue. And it doesn't date to simply what happened on Sunday, the 29th. It dates to going back to the electoral campaign, to his time even as an opposition member, where he's always embraced a policy that his father incepted in 1971, which is this policy of multiculturalism, that diversity is a source of strength, not a source of difference. He has been reaching out to us as Muslim parliamentarians. He has been reaching out to Muslim community leaders around the country. He has been present. He has been at funerals in Montreal and Quebec. He has shown through his actions and his statements that we are a country that will not tolerate this and that we are stronger than what those events sort of demonstrate. In terms of sort of the rhetoric, yes, the rhetoric has elevated, but it's important to take note of sort of where we've come from. When I was running in a campaign, 2 kilometers from where we're sitting right now, I heard the rhetoric. We heard the rhetoric in the campaign. So it's not just a foreign phenomenon, these kinds of divisive tactics. We had the politics of division practiced quite openly, quite blatantly by the previous government. We had things like bans upon wearing the niqab during citizenship ceremonies. We had barbaric cultural practices hotlines. I felt that at the door when I had people actually asking me, what religion are you? I'm not sure if I can support somebody of your faith. That's why I ran for office, to combat those kinds of attitudes. And thankfully, the people in my riding and Canadians, as a general proposition, got past those kinds of sort of specious barriers, and they elected a government that they believe represents their values, which are pluralism, tolerance, and diversity. So can more be done? Of course. Better is always possible, as the Prime Minister likes to say, but there is a lot being done currently by our Prime Minister and by our government. And we're keen to hear from Canadians what more they want to see.
I just want to pick on your personal experience. You said you started running because of what you saw. Are you still feeling the implications of that, or are you feeling that it's the environment and the climate has changed for you on a personal level?
Yeah, yes. So I'll make it personal. So I had somewhat, prophetically in some regards, a town hall in my riding about combating the rise in extremism, racism, and intolerance. That was on, I believe, January 22nd. It's about a week before the events of Quebec. And my riding, like much of Toronto, like many places in this country, is a very progressive riding. There were a lot of strong sentiments expressed about doubling down on our promotion of tolerance, inclusion, and diversity. There were, however, some views that were very much different. So from one perspective, it was very illuminating to realize that we're not talking about sort of urban versus rural, or northern regions versus southern regions. Sentiments that are challenging the status quo, that believe that the country should no longer be the pluralistic, diverse country that we've come to know and love, are being expressed by people right around us. And I think that's an uncomfortable reality that we have to be able to understand. We have to be able to challenge and to confront. And it means difficult conversations, because it's not enough for me to communicate with you or to people watching Let the Quran Speak, because to a certain extent we're preaching to the converted. It's about having conversations with people of other faiths, other races, other backgrounds, that having Polish people here or Muslim people here or people from Botswana or Tibetan Buddhists, that's not a threat to anyone's culture. That enhances the overall culture.
So how do we deal with that? How do we foster a positive and inclusive environment in light of what we're seeing, rise of alt-white right type groups? For example, even in Quebec, there's a group that I think I saw an article a couple of months ago where they're actually patrolling the streets for the rise of radical Islam. How do we deal with that? Because only now I feel like as a community and even in the media, the conversation is starting to come up to that. Up until very recently, Canadians, because we're so polite, I feel like we also shy away from some of these difficult conversations. So, what's your take on that?
I think you're absolutely right, Aisha. Sometimes we are a bit too polite about these kinds of things, particularly conversations that make people uncomfortable. And talking about prejudice and bigotry is never comfortable for anyone, anywhere on the planet. One of the ways we can do so, and I'm not trying to pedestal myself or the new role I've been given, but for example, multiculturalism has at different times in Canada had different sort of emphasis or priority given to it. I've recently been named the Parliamentary Secretary for Multiculturalism to assist the Minister of Heritage, which is a recognition by the Prime Minister that this particular component of the Minister of Heritage's portfolio needs additional emphasis, needs additional prioritization. It needs resources dedicated to it. It needs a stronger input from the government. So I'm proud to be serving in that role as of now. But you can also focus in government's energies through entities that we can fund, ideas that we can promote. So along with the emphasis on multiculturalism comes renewed resources that we can put into programs that promote our diversity. You'll note, for example, this is the sesquicentennial, the 150th anniversary of Canadian Confederation. We have 4 themes that we're promoting. One of those themes, I'm very proud to say, is diversity and inclusion. And what have the previous 150 years looked like? And in some respect, they haven't looked particularly great on that front, because there's our legacies of previous policies, whether you're talking about Indigenous people, Chinese head taxes, etc. But going forward for the next 150 years, what do we want to see from our government that promotes diversity and inclusion?
So on this conversation promoting diversity and inclusion, there have been a lot of the NDP, human rights groups, lawyers, for example, the Premier of Alberta and the Mayor of Calgary have called on the Canadian government to accept more refugees in light of Trump's Muslim ban and some of his policies. Is that something that the Canadian government is considering, or where is that conversation heading?
Yeah, so we're hearing from these people around the country, right? I'm hearing about it in my constituency office. MPs around the country are hearing about this, and that's good. That's the kind of dialogue that we need to have, and that's the kind of passion that we need to have. So one thing that I think has been good over the last 16 months, 20 months, 24 months is just the boost in awareness about international human rights, the boost in awareness of what I like to call refugee literacy. And you'll know that I was the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration prior to serving in this new role as of about 10 days ago. So I'm very familiar with what we've done already in terms of the refugee crisis and what we're planning to do going forward. And what I can say first of all is that we have shown incredible openness, tolerance, and compassion in terms of our response. You'll recollect that, again, under the previous government, there was a specific priority being placed on religious minorities who were fleeing persecution by Daesh. We ended that policy because we believe a victim of Daesh is a victim of Daesh, regardless of whether they're a Sunni Muslim or whether they're a minority religion. They all deserve Canadian protection. And that's what we did, and that's what we implemented. In our first year in office, we accepted 55,000 in the aggregate of refugees from all parts of the world, which includes 40,000 Syrians alone. In our second year, we're planning to accept 40,000. That's 95,000 individuals. That's quadruple what the previous government was doing. So part of my response is that we are already taking steps and have taken steps to open Canada's doors, to respond to the openness that you see all around you. When people are writing letters and putting up flowers at this masjid, you know that that's a sentiment from all Canadians that want to sponsor people, that want our doors open, that want to show a compassionate Canada in their own communities, whether they're New Brunswick or New Westminster, BC, but also as a face to the world. So we are responding to that and have already responded to it.
Are there plans to increase the refugee intake, given U.S., for example, recently suspended their refugee intake program as well?
So I can't speak as directly to that right now. What I do know is that we're considering all of the options that are on the table. As I said, the current numbers for this year are 40,000 individuals. There's been a bit of misinformation spread a little bit about sort of what limits are in place and what caps are in place. For example, one thing that I've constantly tried to correct in the House of Commons and with the media is people are floating around a figure of 1,000. 1,000 is the cap on the number of private sponsorships coming from Syria and Iraq. That is incorrect because it only applies to private sponsorships that are called Group of Five. So yourself, me, 3 other individuals gather together, a little cul-de-sac in downtown Toronto, and we decide to sponsor. There are actually 16,000 private sponsorships that will occur this year, which is again quadruple the number that had been done on an annual basis by the previous government. But those sponsorships need to involve what we call a sponsorship agreement holder. So a united church, a local masjid, a local synagogue, etc. So the limits are nowhere near what is being portrayed in the common parlance right now.
Definitely a lot of good and valuable information. Just as we wrap up, what's your message of, I guess, hope as we work, look towards the future?
I think it's now showing compassion and grieving together. It's understanding that the loss of life at that masjid wasn't a loss of Muslim lives, it was a loss of Canadian lives who happen to be practicing the Islamic faith. And the reaction that we've seen, I take a great deal of comfort in, because I've seen people, whether they're Christian or Jewish or Buddhist or Hindu, rallying around the loss of life simply for the fact of worshiping. So I think if there's some silver lining that we can take from such a horrifically tragic event, it's that Canadians rally together in times of crisis and they double down on values that they believe in, which are values of tolerance, inclusion, and diversity. That's largely why I ran for office. That's what my community believes in. I think that's what all of Canada believes in, and I think that's what we have to rally around as a purpose going forward to fight the challenges that are coming.
I think that's a beautiful way to wrap it up. So thank you so much, Arif, for taking the time and coming on.
Thank you.
Hey YouTube, we hope you benefited from this video. If you liked it, or if you didn't, let us know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more, check out some of our other videos. And don't forget to subscribe so you can get new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.